interesting. So now, after all that, welcome everybody. And I want to welcome Andrew. Andrew Stachiw is a co-founder and worker owner of Toolbox for Education and Social Action, TESA. Some of you may have heard of that amazing little co-op. He's the director of curriculum development and co-op education. He also does a lot of work providing technical assistance through TESA, CDI, and the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. The thing that we wanted to talk about today is his experiences with the multi-stakeholder model, which I know we have some other folks here that are going to have some things to say on that topic as well, which is great. But with that introduction, Andrew, why don't you chime in now and tell us whatever else you'd like to say about your background.
Sure. Thanks, Elias. Yeah, good to see you all. Thanks for having me. Um, yeah, I think you covered the overview pretty well. I put together a couple slides, so when the time comes, I can share my screen and walk through
Okay.
them. Yeah, like Elias said, I do a lot of curriculum development. Tessa, we make board games as well, so we kind of do a little handful of different things. But my role is primarily in technical assistance providing with co-ops themselves, and then I support development organizations, either facilitating trainings or developing the curriculum to do so. And over the last probably 4 or 5 years, started to do a little bit more work in the multi-stakeholder co-op development. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about that today. I don't want to posit myself as like, a total expert here in multi-stakeholder co-ops, more as just someone who has a bit of experience, and hopefully we can start a
Mhm.
conversation and I can help answer some of those questions or point folks to resources.
Great.
There's definitely a handful of them across the country and certainly more internationally. And I think they have quite a bit of overlap with the social co-op model. So there's a lot there and a lot to learn from. And I think it's certainly something that people are really drawn to, the multi-stakeholder model, because, the world we live in, the kind of like poly crisis situation, the idea that a co-op could address a lot of different issues through multiple membership classes or stakeholders is really appealing. That being said, obviously every layer adds more complexity. So it's not something like I would, usually recommend to a group that's just getting started or just learning,
Yeah.
unless it really fits the mold, which a lot of times it does. But yeah, so before I get too deep into that rabbit hole, I can just walk through some structure pieces, and we can
Great.
open up the floor and have a conversation together. Says my screen sharing is paused. I'm not sure. Hold on
Um,
1 second. Might be on my end. Yeah, okay, that's fine. I think I just had to do a privacy thing there. Okay, 1 second.
mhm.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, cool. Um, all right. That's little Tesla stuff. We heard that already, so we are good. Definitely check out our games. They're awesome.
Could you say just one quick thing about being a game co-op?
Yeah, I think
The
our
only one.
model
You're the only guys that have figured this out. What is it?
our model is definitely unique. I think it would not exist if we weren't a worker co-op.
Hmm.
Just because we have the ability to do a lot of different stuff as long as it kind of financially and philosophically, ideologically can make sense for us. Um,
Yeah.
so, we have members spread across the country. I really, when we started, we were, as a lot of co-ops experience, I'm sure you all know this, everyone is more involved in everything for better and for worse in the early stages of TESA's life cycle. I was more involved in games, and which I love, but I'm not a game designer, whereas another worker
Hmm.
owner is a game designer and has done a lot of work on ethical supply chains. It's very hard to have a game printed in the United States. It's nearly
Huh.
impossible. We've done a lot of work on it and still struggle to do so. So
Hmm.
that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, the work, the games and the curriculum development and TA really complement each other, because the TA is focused and we do a lot of cooperative games that
Yes, of course.
co-oply.
Cool,
People
cool.
know A lot of people know cooply. So yeah, I would say it's one of those things where, I think if we were to start it today, and
Uh-huh.
with its current focus, it would probably have a different structure or layout, or be more difficult if people really didn't know each other. But now that we've all been together for TESA's 15 years old now, so there's a lot of trust built. So it's a lot easier to be more dispersed and decentralized.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. So this is just a little structural overview, on multi-stakeholders, and I can share these resources with y'all afterwards. I'm sorry if some of them are a little
Okay.
tough to see. But traditional firm at the top. I don't think I need to go over it too much. I know y'all know a lot about these different structures. And if there are questions in the chat, Elias, if you could let me know because I can't see while I'm
Okay.
on screen
Sure.
here. The traditional cooperative, as you can see, kind of like single member classes, elect a board that oversees a management or not. There doesn't necessarily have to be a management team. Whereas a multi-stakeholder co-op is comprised of multiple stakeholder member classes that elect a board of directors that is representational to those different stakeholder groups that then in turn oversees management. So this is again like pretty it's broad strokes here. There can be a lot of different permutations of this. So here's just a quick example of what this can look like. As you can see, members, different member groups select a board of directors. I'll give you a breakdown actually of a co-op I worked on so you can see this more in what it really can look like. Those folks then hire management. They might hire staff, and in turn, they might, the product or service or other. And as you can see, the different feedback loops, like the members are the consumers or producers or the worker. Um, I'll just let that. I don't know if there are any questions about any of this. I don't want to race through this. Cool. Please just pipe up if you have any.
Okay.
I think one area I definitely have seen a lot of multi-stakeholder interest grow is in the kind of ag food system area as well as housing. Um, Permanent real estate co-ops, if you don't know about them, I recommend checking them out. It's essentially multi-stakeholder housing cooperatives, with, for example, there could be a worker class, there could be a resident class, investor, community, or potentially even have businesses underneath the umbrella that could be associated with a nonprofit or a land trust. And this case right here, this is a co-op that's, I believe, which co-op is it? Our Table or Fifth Season. It's one of the two. But you can see here that it's food systems co-op that has producer members, consumer members, and worker members.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the idea is to kind of like, populate that entire cycle food system with cooperatives. You could imagine where you could even fit in things like shipping and distribution if those, you could get cooperatives in that sphere, or, refrigeration, housing, those kind of different centers. Um, so in this case, you can see the board in the middle is represented by those different groups and it's broken down. It's, in my experience, it's never been kind of like an even breakdown on member class. Like it's not like there's 3 workers, 3 producers, 3 consumer members on a board to make a 9-person board. Typically it's broken down based off of, desired, representational power on the board. I'll put it that way. If you're only going to have, if it's, let's say, imagine it's a housing, a real estate co-op, you're going to have 3 worker owners and 400 residents. You probably don't want to have a 50-50 split on the board. You
Mhm.
probably want to, make it a little bit more representational to the actual breakdown of members.
Hmm.
And okay, so this is a co-op that I helped design governance and decision making on. Um, it's producer and worker, and it's a they do seed production, but they're also partnered with farmers. You can kind of see the different model here in terms of there's the staff and admin, and then there's farmers, growers, makers. You can see the board breakdown. And then they also have an advisory board. So then there's these kind of like different elements, seed companies, affiliates, donors. So they also had investor members. In the case of the multi-stakeholder co-ops that I've worked on, the investor class has been non-voting.
Hmm.
So they're a part of it. They're giving really friendly investment, signing in friendly investment deals with the co-op, and
Hmm.
ceding decision-making power. Typically, they may have a role on the board or advisory board, and it may or may not be a voting position. It depends.
Hmm.
Andrew,
Yeah.
would the investor participants, I won't call them members, might they sit or serve on the working groups as well as the advisory board?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's in my experience, that's typically been one of their member benefits is that they can participate in working groups. Um, and often there has been one in the case of the real estate co-op that I was a part of helping out to start, there was a one board member seat. A lot of the times it was like the investor members were not as interested, frankly, in participating in governance. A lot of their impulse was a desire to financially support something that they believed in, philosophically, ideologically, and there wasn't as much of a desire to like control or steer governance. Of course, there are some folks who really want to be more involved, and that's where that seat was opened up for them.
And if they don't have a vote, but would they get patronage?
In the bylaws there was around like their the paying back their investment was set specifically as like if there is profits x percentage goes to pay investors. So it was kind of like not left up to the board annually to determine if that gets paid back. It was made clear, and set out in the bylaws that profit would be start going towards investors, and they had certain thresholds.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me oddly enough, the investors' vote isn't all that important because they vote with their dollars.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if they don't like what's happening, they just don't provide the dollars. That's
Hmm.
and dollars are, well, the ultimate vote.
Yeah, I mean, in this situation, they're investing. Typically, they're investing in the beginning. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, people could join in, but a lot of it was for like a financial desire to bring on startup money, perhaps to buy properties or equipment.
Mhm.
So some of those folks, it's like not to say that things were gonna go bad or things were gonna shift, but they made their investment, signed their deal, and they were gonna go along with however the co-op went. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah, so that was just a kind of a quick run through. And oh, I have some resource document I just put together, just a quick Google Doc. Let me grab that for y'all 1 second. Just with a bunch of different pieces in it, that you can check out. 1 sec. If you want to look up and see some different examples. Um,
Interesting. Yeah, there we go.
yeah, exactly. Thank you, Rodney. Yeah, so we don't have to focus on this as
Great,
so much,
great.
but no, it's just it has overlap with social co-ops, and Elias wanted me to talk about it. So if there are any questions about it or the utility of it or applications or whatnot, yeah, Mac, I'm seeing that. Yes, yeah, I worked with NCBA for gosh, probably 3 years, to develop this their training portal, developing the curriculum. If you use the training portal, you can get to it through their website. There's there's like a whole list of different workshops. Unfortunately, because of the election of Trump, like the funding was cut entirely, so we had to do a little bit of an abridged final product. I'm really happy that it actually got through. and we were able to get something. But one thing that's really neat, and I'm definitely proud of, is like there's probably over 40 workshops that we put together on different elements of co-ops. But what I'm excited about is that they're entirely customizable. So you essentially, like, we tried to design them to be pretty Swiss Army knife. So like you can go in and, add your own examples. You can cut out different pieces, move activities around, etc., to fit the group that you're working with. So it is designed to be flexible enough for, as someone who's interested in starting a co-op group to use it. But I think, like in most cases, it's best utilized with a developer supporting a group going through that curriculum.
Yeah.
Mac has a question.
Thank you, Elias. And I won't take too much time on this, Andrew. I'm in a situation of we're trying to teach in a high school context and a specific project cooperation. So the specific project is, this is a coal community high school that has lost enormous amounts of property tax support and is, the school is very important to the community and in crisis. And so we want to start to cooperate in this market failure, essentially, to do something. And one entrepreneurial opportunity we've spotted is workforce development to build solar on school and nearby land. But they don't have two nickels to rub together. Okay.
Yeah.
And they're not in a position to borrow money and pay it back because, the utility here in Ohio, the utility bills are going up with data centers, and this school's deficit, multi-million-dollar deficit funding every year right now. And they're talking about tearing down their administration building because they can't afford to pay for it. It's a fairly new administration building. I mean, it's just absolute crisis. Well, in that crisis is an opportunity, and they got land. Solar's getting cheaper. There's employment available in this. Starting to learn, if you want to be involved in this growing industry of not just installation, but there's hundreds of jobs in the energy industry. But we want to do it cooperatively. We want to say, hey, the only way we're going to do something on this school land is to pull together, because nobody can do this by themselves. It's too hard. And we're in the middle of market failure. That's where co-ops start. So let's raise some money. We're thinking about this new app from the, I think it's North Dakota Credit Union fundraising app, no fee, app to, help us start with one solar panel. Let's raise some money to buy a solar panel and stick it in the parking lot. And oh, what's that? Oh, that's a solar panel. We want to raise some more money for a second solar panel. That's how small potatoes we are having to start at. Okay. And then when we get some momentum, there's some workforce development money in the state of Ohio. We can start a training program. But really, we haven't even gotten to that point yet. We've got to get, and there's no money for program development. I'm a retired program developer, so I'm, volunteering and so on. But what we'd like to do is a co-op learning experience, because the workforce development that we want to do is with the local co-op that installs solar panels, Sustainable Cooperative, which Elias and I visited together. And so we can visit a business that can employ these high school students and is actually looking to high school students, looking for new employees. But high school students don't know what a cooperative is. They don't know what this business is. They don't know the educational opportunity that if they might want to work in this field, they might not. Let's start a cooperative experience to encounter it, unpack it, build a couple of solar panels, in the process cooperatively, and learn about a cooperative, because that's what we're finding ourselves having to do. It's not that it's easy to do, it's actually not. So that's end of my wrap. But I want to, and you and I have corresponded already, I want to continue this correspondence, off this webinar. But if anybody else is interested or knows anybody that's interested, that's why I'm chiming in here, because we need all the help we can get. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I know, I'm sure a lot of people have things to say to that. My just kind of anecdotal responses. I taught kind of started how to, starting co-ops at community college and inside of jail for a number of years. And the focus of the class was a lot like what you're saying. Like, it was experiential, like let's design co-ops and act as a co-op. And it was really awesome for all the members, all the participants. And certainly, like, to fund those, and we started a co-op out of the class that was in the jail, and a lot of what we tapped was workforce development money at the state and county level. So I think you're headed in the right direction there. And what I would say is that, in my experience, young people are really excited about co-ops, partially because they haven't been so incredibly indoctrinated into our kind of like top-down hierarchical structures. So there's a little more openness to that, and sometimes a bit more ease in terms of practicing those skills. So I applaud what you're doing. I recommend, pedagogically, to try and do something where, the class is an embodiment of the co-op participants,
Exactly.
co-op members.
Exactly.
And
And
the
this,
fact that you have a business right there that's doing it, you can
yeah.
to it. I mean, there's a lot of positives there.
And this how the Mondragon Co-op started, in a student co-op,
Yeah.
that exists to this day within this large cooperative complex. So it's educationally grounded way to do it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mac, you might want to drop your email address in the chat. Mac works with Co-op Sensi and knows all those folks. Also, Andrew, we got a couple questions in the chat here from
Yeah.
Cheryl.
I put my email in there for folks in case you want to reach out.
Yeah,
I'm
great.
seeing these. Okay, so let me just I'll start. Elias, I see yours about community members as like kind of a member class and multi-stakeholder model. This was a particular in one of the permanent real estate co-ops I helped support. There were basically a lot of community members that were not interested in being investors because they didn't want to come in at such a high level of investment. But were really invested in the project because they felt like, they're in the community where housing was a challenge. They wanted to support that kind of effort. So the co-op made a community member class. Honestly, it was basically like almost like an investor light member, like basically just like a much lower, like, you're going to give us $50 a year or $10 a month, and you get to participate in board meetings and you can join working groups, but you're not getting any money back. And it was kind of like an annual membership fee for those folks and the ability to engage if possible, but really a fundraising mechanism more than anything, and a way to get community engagement. So that just to answer that piece. And then Sherelle, I see the training portal the same as the co-op business school. They're connected to each other. Yes. I think you can find the portal through the business school, but if you can't, let me know and I can help you connect you with it. And then Juliet, I see when deciding the numbers for board seats reserved for each member classes, how does that negotiation go? What is how is the desired influence decided? Yeah, I think I don't have like a straight ahead, this is the way to do it. I think it was really like, it's a lot of the times it kind of spells itself out. Like I've never been in a situation where it's like super contentious and one group feels like they're underrepresented. Often it's pretty clear because I haven't had a lot of experience in the multi-stakeholder model where usually like the worker owner class is like much smaller than the other groups like in this, a lot of the situations I've worked in. So that tends to be like in the real estate co-op, like there were 3 worker owners relative to, they had already multiple properties. We're talking dozens of potential residents. So there was a desire for representation on all parts, of course, but it wasn't like, anyone in the worker group was like pushing for 50-50. What we did do as a note, and I think this is an important thing, is in the bylaws, build in different benchmarks. So for example, after X period of time, board representation is reevaluated by the board, and or if the members of X class hit a certain number, like if you start with 3 worker owners and suddenly you're at 12 or 9, or the residents, you go from 15 to 50, I'm making up numbers, but you get my point. We put in benchmarks that said at those different either chronological and or member numbers, the board would be responsible to reevaluate board representation.
Very
and the
good.
total board number, because often they were starting with like 5 to 9 members, and sometimes it was like maybe we need to get up to 12 or 9 to 12 over time.
Mm-hmm. Matthew Epperson's joined us. Welcome, Matthew. He's got a comment in the chat here you should notice. Salvador, you did have a question. Do you still, or shall I go on to Kellen?
Thanks, Elias. My connection is unstable, so I had
Okay.
to go off camera there. Yeah, I was just going to suggest to Mac if he's been in touch yet with Kathy Stats, who is very involved in the cooperative education and has programmed with youth. She does work with CDF, Cooperative Development Foundation, which is part of connected to NCBA, and there's several other things. But yeah, there's right. You're not going to really find co-op education in our higher education institutions yet. There's other programs that I think for youth that I would really uplift. Cooperation Works has a 3-part series called The Art and Science of Cooperative Development that I personally recommend. There's also Lift Economies, which is a worker cooperative consulting firm in the Bay Area called the Next Economy MBA. It's not an accredited MBA per se, but so the admission there can be to any, it's more open. But really recommend that and the book that they released. Yeah, I think that there's several other folks that would be interesting to connect to. But yeah, in terms of the multi-stakeholder, I think if there's anything that Andrew could share about the differences in classes that consumers perhaps versus producers, they both have a very different way of approaching this, and how that's came about in multi-stakeholder co-ops, because there's been instances here where those two classes have a bigger conflict in terms of what they seek. So yeah, a little bit more, if you could, in instances, would be helpful.
Yeah, I think so. I think one thing I would say, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think you see in, like, for example, in the food co-ops, like grocery stores, there's been a lot of a bigger push to try and have those become multi-stakeholder, to, in addition to a consumer class, to incorporate workers, and tensions can emerge. I think one thing that I've seen that's been an important part of that process and dealing with those is a lot in those worker situations with the worker. They have a union that represents them. And I think that, I mean, I generally, I think a union is a great thing. And so I think in those kind of situations, it can be really helpful to have a third party represent and negotiate. As we know, like, having an additional party that's outside of the co-op group to sort through any sort of conflict is helpful. And in that case, it's, they're a legal body that helps to represent the group, and has a lot of experience and clout. So I don't know if that's getting to your question, Salvador, but I do think that, I think Matthew's comment about the mission of the co-op in the chat, in regard how, as it relates to how the different stakeholder groups have their power on the board, I think, to me, that's at the essence of it. What is the mission of the co-op? Who is it trying to serve? Obviously, it's trying to serve all its stakeholders, but it's usually clear, like, we're not trying to value one group more than the other, but they probably need to have a greater voice and kind of governance, perhaps.
Yeah, I think Kellen had a question.
Hi, Andrew. Yeah, I've got maybe a couple questions. I guess one is first, I guess when I first heard the term multi-stakeholder cooperative, I was just searching around online and found work by Margaret Lund, and didn't know if, like, just in terms of, like, tracing figures and champions in this field, if you could speak a little bit about that body of work and how you relate to it. And then also a more specific question is, do you have any experience in thinking about some stakeholder group that maybe is considered to have diminished decision-making capacity and therefore would have perhaps like a legally authorized representative um, sort of acting on their behalf, and how to incorporate those kind of layers into a multi-stakeholder cooperative.
Yeah, great questions. Yes, Margaret Lund, like I'm pretty sure I linked her report in the resources. Certainly I've read it. That she's the person that I've seen has done most of the publications on kind of the US side. And I mean, as you'll see um in there, her examples, typically they're, you know, a lot of them actually are considered social co-ops, and they're international. So, but yeah, so I definitely recommend the work that she put out there. And there hasn't, frankly, been a ton of other, unlike with
Right.
worker co-ops, where you see lots of publications relative, of course. There's not a ton on the multi-stakeholder model that I've experienced, as far as like academic research. And I think, yeah, I think it's still a little bit scattered in terms of like it hasn't. I think there's just part of it is that the multi-stakeholder model touches a lot of different parts of the co-op world. And some of those like ag can be a little more siloed, but then, you know, so platform co-ops, like they're all kind of like a little adjacent social co-ops. They're kind of in that Venn diagram touching, but they do have their differences. So I think there's just a level of kind of maturity of that work that is still in process. And so let's see, and then to your second question, I think that, like, you know, like I said, I think the investor class is probably one that is going to be de-emphasized in terms of their legal representation or their decision-making power on the board. And then I know that I was seeing Matthew's talking about volunteers. There are, yes, often volunteer members. And I can't say if it depends on the co-op, if that would be something that would be de-emphasized or not. The community members that I discussed earlier, certainly that was a member group that did not have decision-making power, or had a very, like, they maybe had one board seat, and there were like could be hundreds of those community members, maybe even thousands over time. So those would be the kind of groups. And again, I'll circle back to what I said before about kind of like mission, like to use the very specific example of a real estate co-op. Like the mission of that co-op is to provide affordable housing that's permanent. And so the residents are really where the emphasis is put on in terms of their representation in governance and decision-making power. And with kind of the secondary being the worker owners that are staffing that organization, and then the investors and community members, like the most de-emphasized. Yeah, I don't know if that fully answers the question, but I think,
Thank you.
yeah, it depends on the model. I recommend checking out the farm example that I put in there, that had the infographic. I think that's an interesting one to look at to get at your question in terms of those different groups involved and what is their role, especially like if you have, I think things get interesting too, where like you have producer co-ops and then you have worker co-ops, where the producer co-ops may be a large organization, but with one representative, whereas the workers, each individual worker is going to be a member, right? Whereas you could have a producer co-op that's like a distribution center or a whole farm, and maybe they have 50 employees, but they're one member. So I think those are sometimes often considerations that you have to think about as well when you think about governance representation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rodney?
Yeah, I want to follow up on what I think was a question from Matthew, because I had the same question, possibly, which was, this is a query I got recently, and that is, what about a multi-stakeholder co-op where one or more members are local government, like municipal or county, mixing with non-government, like an NGO or workers or consumers? I know of examples like around DC of a co-op, purchasing co-op of all government entities, like local counties. But can that be mixed with non-government entities?
That's a great question. I personally do not know the answer. That would be one of those where I'm like, we probably need to talk to a lawyer on that. I don't know. In my like theoretical brain, it's like, why not? right? And I'm not quite sure how local laws, especially when you think about purchasing and like where you purchase from and different things the government sets up to prevent kind of like collusion or uh,
Yeah.
so I don't know. That's a great question. It seems like it's a very important step um, in the growth of multi-stakeholder co-ops would be those kind of partnerships, especially, thinking about with like even the example that Mac is talking about, where you have local government, county, state funding involved. How can you kind of bridge the gap between these different entities? Yeah,
Yeah.
Rodney, please keep
Well,
going.
just as a direct, so a phenomenon I'm familiar with. So as I was just saying, like around DC, I think there's 20 plus towns and counties working with each other. This is for a purchasing co-op, and they have the ability. In fact, many local jurisdictions have this anyway, where like they have their own rules about procurement,
Yeah.
but they have what's called the rider option. I may have the word wrong, where they can like jump on this somebody, let's say a bigger county or entity already has a contract to buy, safety vest for the Department of Transportation. The small entity can just be a rider and join this other group. So it really simplifies things, especially for small governments that don't have a lot of staff.
Mhm.
So uh, it sounds like there's already precedent where, like, let's say you're worried about, well, yeah, like you want more affordable nursing care, and there's an entity that is trying to source it, um, and a small city says, okay, we're gonna like be a rider on their procurement. Now, in our circle, we're thinking, okay, that first entity should be working with, say, a co-op of home healthcare providers. Anyway, I guess I want to put out some hope there. Maybe nudge somebody who's good at research to find out about small local governments. Also, it could be easier politically to persuade, say, a town of 10,000 to do something than it is to get, New York City or I don't know,
Yeah.
a bigger entity to change their habits.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of what you bring up, and this is just adjacent, but it's something that I often talk with groups about because there's always an interest in multi-stakeholder model. People, like I said before, have this like, oh wow, like we could do a co-op that could address this and this and this and this all together, right? And I often say to them, like, well, I like that. And like, does this stakeholder group need to be a member?
Mhm.
Or do you just have a business relationship with them that makes financial sense? And so part of, what I'm hearing from that is, are these different groups members in a co-op, or do they have just a business relationship or a buying relationship together? And so that's often just a threshold question I put out there for all of us to think about, because I think there's a lot of allure, but also like, does it actually make sense? Like, why does this group need to be a part of governance and decision making? Um, and sometimes it really totally does. And a lot of times, especially when it comes to like integrating a consumer membership model, it just doesn't. Like sometimes we're just trying to like Frankenstein together every different potential stakeholder into the co-op. And we always have to step back and like, is this actually going to work for the business? Is it going to work for governance? Like, does that even, why would they be at the table? So that's just something to think about, with some of these really different models, I'm really curious if folks find out more about potential for municipal or public entities that are multi-stakeholder with private. I'd be really curious to hear more about that, especially in the US context.
Yeah.
I don't know if that exists.
I would say Matthew and I and Minsun certainly found that in the Italian context and elsewhere too. I want to invite Matthew to chime in on a thought I was having about, what is the benefit of multi-stakeholder, which certainly seems to make life more complicated. And I think there's more than one answer. But in the case of social co-ops, one of the kind of pitches that we heard doing this research around these co-ops in Italy is that they they go to government, they go to the private sector, and they say, we need your support because we are supplying something that you don't know how to do very well. And the reason we can do this kind of social innovation, which is the kind that we feel we should be most interested in, not the conventional kind, is because we have sort of a special method for creating, in this case, social care. It isn't just that it's bottom up, it's that it's also co-created. It's co-created by the people delivering the care, in some cases by people receiving the care, by family members, by volunteers, maybe by local funders, and maybe even by local government. And their point is, and the data do seem to indicate, if you take that approach and have the ability to keep it going, the quality of care is very high. Everybody agrees this is the best way to go. This is the opposite of top down, right? But it is the co-creation process that has something to do with why go to all this trouble to bring in all these different stakeholders. I want to invite Matthew to chime in on that if you're able to come in.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, sorry. Yeah, it's a bit of a public space where I am. So
Okay.
yeah, no, I think that all of that definitely resonates for me as well, Elias, about where we've seen this overlap of why social co-ops typically are, but certainly not always multi-stakeholder. We do actually
Right.
see a good number who are single stakeholder, particularly like worker cooperative social co-ops. But yeah, I do think there's something about the value add of being multi-stakeholder that I think the intention is to sort of triangulate all these different sorts of stakeholders and interests in, sort of a shared ownership and governance model, whereby we find that like families, for example, right? That like I think a lot of times in sort of the care equation specifically, we had found that here at least in the US, we don't necessarily assume that like a family structure that surrounds someone who needs care rises to the level of like a participant in the care equation. And I think that's where the multi-stakeholder thinking can be so useful, expanding the sort of the realm of who is an active and agentic contributor to what care is and how it is delivered, to where
Yeah.
groups like the families who surround where care is provided, or communities around people who are struggling with addiction, or we call them second chance or returning citizens, formerly incarcerated individuals, like the way that communities all surround individuals. I say that's where I think the ecosystem thinking becomes
Yeah.
so part and parcel of the social cooperative equation. So I think that's where I've been really excited about it as well.
Very good. Yeah, I would add just briefly that that's one of the sort of light bulbs for me as we got into this work, looking at models in Italy and Quebec and South Korea and so on. We tend to think in terms of a co-op here and a co-op there. And when these other communities start co-ops, they're really creating little ecosystems. It's really a much more communal kind of project in many ways. I think sometimes that's true here, but on the whole, it's harder. Whereas certainly in Italy, there's a thick web of associations and funders and like a dozen co-op banks. It's just a much thicker intermediate level of support for this kind of work. And we have to kind of patch that together by comparison. So difficult. Derek.
Something that's kind of sticking out to me in the work that I've been doing in community and looking at developing these ecosystems and having conversations with people and looking for enrollment and engagement is the mass opportunity to volunteer in community these days.
Huh.
And really looking for some conversations and some ways to fund equitable distribution of communal resources rather than just constantly asking for volunteers and people to show up as stakeholders, that maybe someday, if the stars align, that there may be some distribution of equity, and really looking at where possibly there might be some conversations or some connections to resources. And some of them have already been shared here that I want to go look at deeper. And I feel like when I see people's eyes glaze over and like they're already at full capacity, they're already overloaded to try to take on new concepts, new ideas that require some engagement, enrollment, or volunteer space where there isn't a distribution of something. I'm finding it very, like we were just at the library last night, and our library is trying to figure out how to expand programs, and they're finding a challenge developing resources for volunteers that can show up regularly. I'm like, well, maybe there's ways in our community to have employers sponsor volunteer time. I'm just curious how maybe some of these
Yeah, yeah.
tied into some other social networks or where some of these conversations might be held. It seems for entry points for people to engage though, to be able to offer them, because we are in a market economy, some resources might be meaningful.
Yes, definitely. Let's see, Andrew, I see a comment from Nicole. Nicole, you want to just say what you were getting at there?
Sure. Excuse me. Yeah, it was just a comment saying that when we founded our multi-stakeholder cooperative, we work in the waste management space, which of course in the US is founded from like the old school mafia model where the waste companies own waste. And so anything in competition oftentimes gets
Noble
like
tradition.
yeah, often gets cease and desist letters, which we have people in our community who've already had encounters with that. And so that was the entire
Wow.
intention, is to involve the waste company as a part of the co-op. But it is
Hmm.
definitely like with the municipal contracting and all that stuff, it is definitely a quagmire, which we have not figured out, but we're still working on. Just, yeah, commenting how much I appreciate the thought, and hoping, Andrew, maybe you'd, if I could ever hire you as a consultant, I'd love to pick
Hmm.
your ear more. But thank you all.
Okay. Anybody want to comment on that, or should we go to, let's see, who had a hand up?
I did. I was just going to contribute
Salvador, yes.
To the conversation there, as I'm hearing some of the thoughts here on municipal governments being involved in co-ops. I know that the state of Missouri would be interesting to look at more because there are cooperatives there that exist in which the public school districts are the members.
Hmm.
And they provide certain types of services, right? So benefits to teachers and buying in bulk and things like that. So that's one of the things that stood out to me because I looked into that when I was doing research. And the other pieces that I wanted to mention there that in Missouri, some of those are governed by there's been legislation that governs some of those pieces there, so that would be interesting, right, to look at those statutes to see more about how that works. And I think the conversation in regards to the role that nonprofits play in co-ops, I think this is a very interesting conversation because I see this often where we can be so used to thinking in working within nonprofits that we take some of those ideas and try to fit them into the co-op model. I've seen some projects where we spent so much time trying to create a membership class for nonprofits to have representation in the co-op. And that to me was very interesting to the point of how much should you spend for people to really be involved, like who needs to have representation in the piece. So there is something in terms of being able to volunteer for nonprofits that's not available for co-ops. There's the differences there of what's really allowed because it is a for-profit entity. And of course, we know the difference, or know that sweat equity does have to be put in to be able to get something launched. But the difference there in terms of being able to structure something that is being done equitable and is being done in a way that doesn't perpetuate those oppressive systems, right? Being very mindful of that. So yeah, just wanted to share that, Elias. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Okay. All right, we're just about at the end here. This has been great. Anybody else got any loose ends you'd like to tie up? Great exchange of resources and links here. This is good. Yeah, Rodney?
Oh, yeah, just I've been trying to find good English language studies about the Italian social co-ops,
Huh.
but I found it kind of thin. Maybe I wasn't looking in the right places. Um, if you can share any such links, that'd be fantastic. And I do
You
have
know,
an appetite for academic studies, so those are fine too.
I can tell you there's a guy you may know, Matthew Hancock, who has written, he speaks Italian, studied in Italy, and has written a little bit about Italian social co-ops. And then there's to blow our own horn here, our social co-op report that we did, which you've probably seen, has a little bit, but there is not a lot. And it is also kind of a moving target. They are evolving in a lot of ways from where they were, say, 10, 15 years ago. And we're trying to keep up with that a little bit. Um, but well, final thought, I'm about to publish a little paperback, like a 100-page paperback book on social cooperatives, which will have something of what we had in the report. It's going to be out in maybe a couple of months or so. Nathan Schneider wrote the intro. Jessica Gordon Emhart wrote the afterword. So that's kind of cool. But that's about all there is, at least at this point. So we need to develop that more because I think the Italian model is really fantastic and very comprehensive, very kind of holistic in the way and community led in the way they think about things. So hopefully more will come out on that.
Well, thank you in advance for writing that.
Yeah, sure. Any other loose ends here?
I think Bruno, I believe is his name,
Bruni.
does a lot
Yeah.
of work on the
Yes.
Italian cooperatives. And I'm having a senior moment because there's another one who's more famous and was in fact an
Stefano
advisor to
Zamagni,
Benedict. I'm sorry?
right? Stefano Zamagni.
Zamagni, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're famous guys. They wrote a book together called Civil Economy, which is kind of an Italian take. It's sort of the alternative to the Adam Smith Northern European tradition. Fascinating book. And they also were working with Pope Francis on the whole Economy of Francesco project. So there is a little bit of stuff like that out there, but not enough yet.
What about John Rostakis' book that has a
Yeah.
chapter in it?
Yes, that's right. Aristakis has two books, and he's actually covering social co-ops in both of them, and including the more recent one. The name of
Well,
which
what is the more recent one? I didn't know we had another one.
Yeah, what is it called? Something about civilizing the state, I think is it.
Okay.
Civilizing the state. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very good. Came up maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I have to head
Okay.
out, y'all, but thank you so much for having me. Good
Thank
to
you,
meet
Andrew. Good to have you
Feel
with
free
us.
to reach out.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Great session, and we'll put this up on YouTube if you want to share it around. Take care.